I've been thinking a lot about Morrowind lately. The game is the only reason my channel exists in the state that it does, and it's had a massive impact on my life and my tastes in media. So what is An Morrowind? Morrowind, released in a year when I was a pathetic and small child concerned with why the Teletubbies kept breaking their toaster and whether Blue was going to actually find any goddamn clues, is an RPG by alleged game developer Bethesda. It has an overcomplicated plot with more politics than the Star Wars prequels, combat that is completely incomprehensible, DLCs that are more interested in seeing how many nails they can jam under your fingernails than they are in giving you a good experience, and one of the weirdest progression and difficulty curves that I've ever experienced in a game. And the fan base for Morrowind ranges on a spectrum from completely rabid and wild to feral and crazy. Now, with all of that being said, the point of this video series is still going to be to make the case that Morrowind might be one of the single best works of fantasy fiction ever made. I'm just hoping I can bring a little bit of fresh air into the discussion surrounding Morrowind, because the test community, we've had nothing since ESO, and no mainline single-player, honest-to-God Elder Scrolls games since Skyrim, which as of time of recording was 12 fucking years ago. The conversation around Morrowind has slowly coalesced into a general praise of every single part of it, and it is generally seen as the good Elder Scrolls game by nearly the entire community. Everyone agrees that Morrowind is good. So clearly, everything that Morrowind does has to be good. And that's not true. I am hoping with this series that I can direct praise at the parts of Morrowind that I feel really deserve it, while also admitting that a decent chunk of this game just does not hold up fantastically well for a variety of reasons. I'm gonna be less nice than most of the longer retrospectives of this game, because I feel it's important to be able to be honest about the bad parts and the things that you like, because Morrowind has a lot of things that could be improved or iterated on. And that was just as true when it came out as it is now. An important thing to say about the conceit of this video series is that I'm mostly going to be looking at Morrowind from the perspective of the modern day. I am not a fan of judging a game as if we were still living in the year 1916, crouched in a trench with nothing but a mud-clogged Nintendo DS, praying that the Germans don't find us while we're playing Super Mario 64. And, we hear their boots hit the floor of the trench, and we snap the DS shut, praying that they don't find us, and our blood freezes into ice as we hear a loud, piercing voice saying, "Bye-bye," and our death warrant is sealed. There's no need to pretend that we're all 10 years old again, and we haven't played several decades worth of games since Morrowind came out. So, let's talk about Morrowind's combat. Morrowind's combat is a confusing mixed bag. It's all scram-bibbly-bobbly-dobbled up. I would call it dated, but that's a little bit disingenuous because it was just as weird when it came out. Incoherent is a slightly better term, possibly at risk of collapse at any time. It is riddled with a large number of issues that make fighting a confusing and inconsistent mess a lot of the time. An important thing to mention before we carry on is that, well, you're watching a retrospective of Morrowind. You've probably already played Morrowind. Most people have not played Morrowind, especially a lot of people who we would like to play Morrowind. This feels obvious, but having already climbed that learning curve and gotten to the top of the hill colors your opinion of how hard it is to learn, because to you, it's simple. You've already played it. You understand it. But it's really difficult for new players, and let's go over that. So, hit chance. Now, don't get me wrong, hit chance is a mechanic that I actually really like in most RPGs and tactics games. The idea of a character's improving skills being represented by more consistently landing a successful attack is rad, and it's realistic. I've been playing tabletop wargames and RPGs for the majority of my life, so I'm very, very accustomed to the idea of rolling a die and seeing if I hit or not. The system does work better in turn-based games, but I genuinely believe it can work just fine in a real-time environment, provided that the player is allowed to see, plan, and understand what their hit rate will be on any given target, and that is where Morrowind fails. Now, Morrowind's hit chance system is fairly easy to understand once you've been told it, or once you've looked it up, but it is not adequately explained in-game. I generally consider it to be a failure of game design whenever the player is expected or required to close out of the game and read a fan wiki or a manual to understand a game's mechanics well enough to get through the game on a first playthrough. I understand that back in the year 1066 AD, when William the Bastard crossed the ocean and Morrowind was released onto the world for the first time on the fucking Xbox, it was generally expected that you would read the entire manual for an RPG before playing it, either while it installed on your slow as shit, runic, rock-carved, mineral-based PC, or while you were out and about in your, day-to-day life farming turnips and away from your computer. The issue is that going into a game in the modern day, the majority of players are not willing to sit down and read a massive manual before booting up a game for the first time, and I know that back in the day when I was a kid, I absolutely did not read the manual to this game. So, hit chance in Morrowind is this nightmare equation here, and it looks very scary, but it's effectively just a combination of your weapon skill, part of your agility, and part of your luck. The enemy then gets an evasion chance based on their agility and their luck, and that is subtracted from your chance to hit. There's a couple of other factors, but those are not super important. There is then a block chance if the target is using a shield, which is their block skill added to their evasion chance. This is a pretty decent system in a vacuum, as the lack of a dodge skill to counter your rising weapon skill will slowly lead to you hitting the majority of your strikes, and by endgame, basically all of them. Morrowind is fundamentally a power fantasy about becoming the weirdo wasteland messiah of the worst elven society, so that ever-increasing power is genuinely fun and fits the game pretty well. The problem, again, is just a lack of clarity in-game. For an excellent and representative example of the poor in-game clarity of Morrowind's combat, let's take a look at the short blade skill. The short blade skill has a description that simply says, characters with great short blade skill are more effective with short, quick, thrusting weapons like daggers, tantos, short swords, and wakizashis. This is very vague. More effective could mean anything from more damage to a perk unlock like the paralyzing stab in Oblivion, or an increased chance to hit as it actually works in-game. The problem is, more effective is such a vague term that it can cause confusion in newer players as to why exactly they are having trouble hitting something, or why exactly their character is having trouble in combat in general. This wording really should say, characters with good short blade skill are more likely to hit with short, quick, thrusting weapons like daggers, tantos, short swords, and wakizashis. This is infinitely more clear, but Bethesda seems to be allergic to specificity in almost every part of Morrowind's UI, particularly the tooltips. Now, when I said no other factors mattered in the combat equation, that wasn't entirely true. Fatigue also factors into combat, but also basically every other mechanic in the game. The best way to explain it is that a full bar of your delicious green juice will give you a plus 25% chance to anything you do. Anywhere where you roll a die, plus 25%. And an empty bar gives a 25% penalty, so no matter what you're doing, minus 25%. This system is fine on the surface. A lot of really good games have combat systems based around stamina management and use, but Morrowind's implementation has a few issues. The main problem with Morrowind's stamina/fatigue system is that moving at your full, normal movement speed drains fatigue at a pretty substantial rate. There is a walk button in the game which does allow you to move without draining stamina, but the walking movement speed, especially early on, is agonizingly slow, to the point of making the game miserable and borderline unplayable for a lot of people. This leads to the player frequently being ambushed by enemies while their fatigue is empty just from daring to move at full speed. Add on to that the base regen rate is incredibly slow, and most first-time players will be eating a minus 25% debuff on all of their skills without really understanding why. Fun anecdote about the hit chance system while we're talking about it. When I was a child and I was playing this game for the first time on the original Xbox, I was firmly convinced that the hitboxes were broken and that I could only hit people if I stabbed them in the thighs. I wasn't a very bright child. Another excellent example of how Morrowind fails to be clear to you is exactly how much damage a weapon deals. When you hover over a weapon, you will get a whole bunch of damage numbers for various attack types: chop, slash, and thrust. None of these matter, as the directional attack system is so undercooked as to be nearly worthless, and the game comes with a setting to just use the one with the highest numbers, and I recommend just turning that on and leaving it on. One of the most deceptive pieces of text in the game is right here in the damage range. When you see does 1 to 6 damage on a weapon in an RPG, you have been trained to think, aha! So when I hit someone with this, it will roll a die and do anywhere from 1 to 6 damage at random. That is not how Morrowind works. Instead, the first number is the damage when you tap the attack button, and the second number is the damage when you hold the attack button down and charge up for a second or two. You will always do that higher damage number if you charge up like this. There's no randomization. Damage calculation is a lot in Morrowind, but the gist is that you do damage based on how long you charged up your weapon up to a cap. This damage value is then multiplied by a factor based on your strength and then fed into this equation based on their armor value. There are caps and minimums and shit in there, but unless you're doing really high level PvP in the multiplayer sorta mod, none of the caps really matter all that much and you will rarely run into them. Let's let that sink in for a minute. Morrowind implies that hitting an enemy is not random due to its nature as a 3D game with a first-person perspective and aiming, and its lack of miss notifications, while implying that damage is random by providing a wide damage range, despite the fact that hitting is random, but damage is fixed and deterministic. This kinda sucks, and no amount of us as a community being used to it makes it not kinda suck. Now, all of that being said, all of that complaining and whining about how obtuse the mechanics are for new players, once you do understand how the combat mechanics work, the combat is actually pretty fun. The peaks of power that you get to in Morrowind are insanely high, and once you have some levels and some better gear and you can start punking all the enemies that kicked your ass earlier in the game, it is one of the most satisfying feelings that you can have in any RPG, though it does tie into some progression issues we'll get to later in this series. In addition, you can get into this weirdly great flow with melee combat in this game, dodging in and out of enemy attack ranges during their animations, charging up strikes in the way in and landing them and then backing off to avoid the ripostes. It isn't like Dark Souls or Street Fighter or anything, but it is an engaging combat system that never actively detracts from the experience once you understand it and have a character with some levels in them. High-level Morrowind characters are capable of some feats of DBZ anime bullshit that would make even the most dedicated JoJo fans start to say, I think you went a little too far there. Now, those of you who are familiar with Morrowind and tests on the whole may have noticed that I haven't talked about magic yet. This is for a good reason, as the magic in Morrowind is fucking fantastic, and I will be talking about that in a future video all on its own. I really wanted to focus on the physical combat with pointy sticks and blunt instruments, as whenever I've introduced someone new to the game of Morrowind, or I've seen someone playing it for the first time online, the melee combat has been by far the biggest hurdle for them to get over before they start enjoying the game. Followed immediately by the entire city of Vivec, but we will get there when we get there. Now, next time in this series, we will be talking about something good. Something I find central to the game and fundamental to understanding the appeal of Morrowind, and that is Vvardenfell itself, Morrowind's world space. This is going to be a series of videos, as I've alluded to throughout and probably stated somewhere and then forgot about. I considered doing one huge Patrician TV grade video, but the idea of just not uploading for 8 months kind of put me off of that. I plan on splitting this series up and alternating between like a gameplay-centric episode like this one and then a fluff or tone or vibe or story-centric episode. That second category is where Morrowind really excels, and I am thrilled to talk about it. So, yeah, see you when I finish the next one. This has been a huge content pivot, I'm aware, and I'm really sorry about the lack of content on this channel while I worked on it. I've never really made any large video projects like this, and I really hope that this one doesn't just completely suck. Leave any feedback that you've got in the comments below. I would love to hear it. I will read it. I will probably put a heart on it because I have no self-control. And for those of you who are in the Discord or on my Patreon and you're wondering why this took so long, Baldur's Gate 3 is eating my life right now, and I'm very sorry about that. But, yeah. Oh, yeah, and I do have a Discord and a Patreon, so if you want to join those, I'll put the links in the description as they usually are on all the memes and everything. I'm off script right now. I'm running wild. Yeah, I'm looking forward to working on more of this. In addition, if you have any, like, specific parts of Morrowind that you would like to make sure that I talk about, any specific quests or characters or mechanics, just leave it below and I might add it, unless the suggestion sucks. So, yeah. Cheers.